Well, hello to you, Gwilym. It seems like an absolute age since we've done one of these, mate.
It has been an age, and it's been empty and meaningless.
Your life has been nothing, really.
There's not a lot going on, really. Not a lot, no.
No announcements, nothing, you didn't get married or anything?
I got married.
Yeah. That's quite important, isn't it?
Yeah.
How did that go?
Oh, it was lovely, thank you. It was up in Long Eaton, near Nottingham, and it was really pleasant.
Is that the family seat up there?
Yeah, well, yeah, that's us. We own the town. It was right in the middle when Omicron was just landing and no one knew what it was and everyone was getting it all at the same time. So it's really touch and go. And I think we were on the big WhatsApp group, and the day before, Lydia and I tested negative, posted pictures of our little, what they called lateral flows. And that meant that anyone who was still standing could go. And we got 30 out of 36 people came. So it was very nice.
That's not bad, is it? That sounds really nice. And you must be getting nappies in the house and buying all sorts of baby accoutrements and stuff, because you're going through this as an elderly parent now, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, that's what happens after marriage. A baby comes almost instantly.
That's amazing, isn't it? It's just extraordinary.
I'm days away. At any point, actually, we may have to postpone a recording at some point. But yes, any moment now, really exciting.
Do you know sex or anything like that? Or
no, I don't, and Lydia does, because she's Spanish, and we had a scan in Spain where they told you. And embarrassingly, I can't understand Spanish, so it's known, and it's been really good fun because one of the games is she has to fool me into thinking it's the opposite sex to what it's actually going to be.
Right,
so it's quite a complicated game.
But you'll know soon enough, won't you?
I do. I think. No, I don't know.
Well, I had grandchild number 5, grandson number 4 in on the 11th of December. So that was all very exciting.
Are any of them called Lee yet?
No, none of them are called Lee. They go through this phase, don't they, with names? So my boys particularly all had names that I thought would make them stand out in life and stuff like that. So they've got names that they now deeply resent.
Sebastian, Horatio, Nebuchadnezzar.
No, they probably hate me for this, but Jarrett, Kane, which is fairly common now, but it wasn't when he was born.
I like that.
Cole.
Say again?
Cole, Coel. Most people call him Cole because they can't kind of roll the Cole.
Yeah.
And Nye and Urine.
Nice.
Yeah. So okay. So that's the voice. Yeah. So they've rebelled and they've gone back to names like Jack and Joe and.
Yeah. Well, don't talk to me about old names. I've spent my whole life spelling mine out. I've nearly given up. And how's your toe? Yeah. How's your toe? Well,
I've just had a game of squash. I nipped out at lunchtime to have a game of squash. Didn't play very well. I lost. And I can assure you that it is still jammed hard up against my big toe. But I have come up with a new mechanism of separating the two. So, we talked about the toe sock on a previous podcast.
Oh, the genius.
That I thought I might have invented. Well, I've refined it now because it kept slipping off. So what I've got now is a bit of silicone tube, which is, so it's a bit like having a bit of a bike inner tube around 3 toes. So I now strap 3 toes together with this silicone tube, and it stops all of the blisters and everything. It's brilliant.
And has the tortoise. That's so.
I did. I knew you would ask me, so I've been down to the shed. I've been into his industrial storage unit, and he's all right. He's 7.2 degrees, which is exactly where he should be.
That is the angle he's at. Sorry.
No. That's the temperature he's at, not the angle.
Okay, right.
Lee Davis and Gwilym Roberts are the 2 IPs in a Pod, and you are listening to a podcast on intellectual property, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Patent Attorneys.
Anyway, we're probably we've got guests, of course, waiting in our green room, and they're probably incredibly bored because they can hear us and all that sort of thing. So, shall we crack on with the show?
Let's go.
Fantastic. So, great pleasure to have 2 guests on today. It's the first for us, Gwilym. We've got 2 guests who are sat in the same room. So people who are physically close to one another on a podcast, which is something that we've not experienced, well, except for the one we did in the pub. But even then, we did. There was a bit of separation. Yeah. So I hope I pronounced the names right. We've got David Gillies and Sean Bicknell, who are. So I was going to say we're chartered accountants, and I had lots of clever lines lined up about chartered accountants. But it's the firm that are chartered accountants. The firm's friend. I think that's how it's said.
Yes, friend partnership. Yep.
I didn't know whether the partnership was important. So, Sean, David, whichever one of you wants to go first, would you like to introduce yourselves and make yourself sound more interesting than the accountant I thought I was getting?
Okay, thanks for that, Lee. Hi, Gwilym. So, hi, guys. My name's Sean Bicknell. I'm the Business Development Director at Friend. A bit about Friend first. So, Friend Partnership, what are you? People always think, where does the Friend come from? Are you some kind of dating agency or something like that? And actually, we're not. The owners of the company, their surname is Friend. We're chartered accountants. We're a firm of chartered accountants, specialist tax advisors. We do corporate finance, but we absolutely specialise in the sort of specialist areas of tax, and David will talk about that. We do your payroll and we'll do your accounts and we'll do your audit, but when it gets to the really complicated specialist sort of interesting stuff, that's where we really shine, and that's our focus. So I've been working with Friend for about 15 years. They're actually my accountants of all things. So my business development consultancy has used these guys forever, and then I've came in, they brought me in to do some of my stuff for them. That's sort of like where we are. And David?
Yep, my name's David Gillies. I am the head of tax at Friend Partnership. Although the firm are chartered accountants, I myself am not. I'm a tax specialist and have been for more years than I care to remember. Actually started off with what used to be known as the Inland Revenue back in 1987, if any of you can remember that far back.
Do all tax specialists start at the Inland Revenue or HMRC or whatever it's called these days?
I don't know about these days. Certainly of my vintage, I think probably a lot of them did. Because the pay was so rubbish for the Inland Revenue, you had to move out into the private sector after a short while.
Yeah, my son's number two son's got almost 10 years in tax in HMRC now, and he's starting to feel that it might be time to move on. I'd be quite glad when he does, because I don't like mentioning that I've got a tax man in the family, so I tend to avoid it.
Well, we've got you. There's any job offerings? We could get a few things done on this podcast.
He's done some niche tax work, minimum wage, licensing.
If he were to get into VAT, then he will become like gold dust. If he can spend some time in HMRC dealing with VAT, then people will fall over themselves in the private sector to employ him.
Yeah, I think he started in VAT and then wanted to do something a little bit more interesting. I think was his turn of phrase. I'm fitting a kitchen for him at the weekend. I'll have a chat to him. Anyway, we're here to talk, I think, patent box, which is extraordinarily exciting. I've been doing the preparation for this. I never realised there was going to be so much to talk about. So,
Lee, when patents meet tax, I mean, that is a proper fusion of excitement.
Sort of a marriage made in heaven, really, isn't it? Now, and Gwilym and I were talking about this with a meeting this morning, and we were talking about the podcast. I remember when the patent box thing first came along, I chaired a webinar for SEPA, so it would have been 7 or 8 years ago, on the patent box. And I'm neither a patent attorney or anyone who knows anything about accounting. So I came out of that webinar, having chaired it, knowing probably less than I did when I went into it. So really hoping to learn something with you guys.
Okay.
Can you tell us where it all comes from? How did this all come about?
Yeah, so I was the same, actually, when we started looking into patent boxes as a specialist area, and David wanted to sort of bring it to the fore and push it forward. I hadn't got a clue what it was all about either. So, you do a bit of Googling, and I sat in with David. He obviously out-teched my brain a little bit, and I had to sort of get a bit down to brass tacks. But yeah, so it's been around since 2013. It's an interesting story, actually, sort of around about the time it started. It's basically a government scheme, if you like, or regime to keep UK-based IP in the UK. And there's an interesting story that sort of sums it up with Starbucks, actually. Starbucks kicked it all off. They didn't, of course, but the timing's sort of right. So when Starbucks have got a huge amount of patents, like they've patented everything to do with the production of a cup of coffee, it seems. I had a bit of a look, actually, and they've literally got hundreds and hundreds to do with nozzles and foaming things and all kinds of different stuff. And they basically held all those patents in the Netherlands because the Dutch guys were before us. They've got their version of patent box is called Innovation Box, and that started in 2007. So they had all of these patents held in a Dutch company, and then they actually licensed the UK Starbucks, gave them the license to be able to use those patents. And the license fee they charged was roughly the same amount as the amount of tax they would have to have paid in the UK. So I think we all remember back to the news around that time when some of these big corporates were sort of getting a load of grief for not paying their due amount of tax. Obviously, none of them were doing anything against the law or anything like that. It might have been unethical to some people. But yeah, so that's what they were doing. They had a patent. It was held in Holland. and then they licensed their UK company to be able to use it, and the license fee that they charged basically vastly reduced the amount of tax that they had to pay in the UK. So the UK thought, well, okay, fair enough. How do we get around this? If you can't beat them, join them. And they started up the patent box in 2013. So basically, it means the very highlight, and David will dig into it deeper, is basically anything that you sell that has a patent on it, any revenue from that, you pay a lesser amount of corporation tax on than you would do otherwise. So I think, David, does that sum it up, or do you want to add?
I think so, yes. I mean, in the UK, the patent box regime is a tax incentive scheme that, in essence, offers you a 10% rate of corporation tax on your profits from intellectual property. So that compares with the main rate of corporation tax, currently 19%, and in 2023, that's going up to 25%. So the differential is getting bigger. So it's very attractive. We are not alone in having a patent box regime. Sean mentioned the Netherlands. Actually, the OECD, I think it's 37 members currently, 19 of which have got some form of patent box incentive. And the level of incentive varies. If you look at Greece, I think with Greece, you get a 3-year 100% exemption from their corporation tax on your IP profits. Other countries like Belgium, you get a rate of 3.75% as opposed to a main rate of 15%. So we're kind of middle of the road in terms of the level of incentive you get. But it's certainly worth having.
Interestingly, Germany don't have a patent box regime. So we're the same as France. France is 10% as well. Germany don't have one at all.
It's interesting, the backstory to that, because I've certainly had one client who I've mentioned, in broad terms, hey, there's this patent box thing. Have you thought about looking at it? And you mentioned there about how, let's face it, you mentioned Starbucks, they didn't exactly get great publicity back in the day for doing it. It's I think that unfortunately tainted it a little bit. So I've certainly had personal experience with clients saying, actually, if we're a high street name, we're not interested in doing that, because anything that looks like we as a British company are doing anything to avoid paying tax, in the current climate of the bad publicity that was going out for other entities, we don't want to do it. So do you feel that kind of reputational issue has gone away now?
I think it has, bearing in mind that this is actually embedded in the tax legislation, in Corporation Tax Act 2010. The tax incentive scheme is laid out. I think it's probably unfair that back in the day it was seen that way, whereas really it was an incentive to keep your IP in the UK. And guys, if you keep your IP in the UK, we'll give you a tax incentive.
I think, if you go back to, holding your IP and your patents offshore and then doing a little bit like what Starbucks did and not paying any tax over here, yes, bad. Nobody wants to be seen doing that. But I think, like David said, most European countries now have a similar scheme. It's part of tax legislation. I think all businesses these days need every advantage they can get. Why not take advantage of it? And obviously, with corporation tax, as David said, rising next year, the potential savings are huge, really.
I'll be quizzing you on how you calculate it, because again, as a patent attorney, well, actually, it's a good point. As a patent attorney, when we saw the original patent box legislation, we just sat and looked at it, thinking that's insane. The amount you can claim of IP, it seems to be unfettered. And I always felt that the legislation, with all due respect, was written by people with more knowledge of tax than patents, because it looked like you could play all kinds of surprising games with, from the patent attorney perspective, a broadly worded claim. I did understand, though, that the kind of extreme elements of the scheme got cut back a few years back, so it's definitely been reined in a little bit. Is that correct?
Well, there have been further conditions added to it, again, as a result of the OECD. They have introduced, things such as the development condition. There is now a very strict regime for how you calculate your IP profits, known as a streaming method, which everybody has to use now. But I don't think overall the scope of it has actually changed that much, because if you consider that it is your IP profits, or your profits from IP, generated worldwide that are still going to fall within the scheme. What's been tightened up is elements such as making sure that companies that claim it are actually either significantly involved in creating the IP, significantly involved in developing the IP. So it tightens it up rather than just involved in management.
So it's kind of it's in terms of the incentive that you mentioned. It's not just we can do a better tax dodge than the Netherlands, which is obviously not what we're for. I mean, the incentive then is it's all about stimulating innovation in the UK, getting IP to be held in the UK. Okay,
absolutely. Yeah,
because people need that, I think, to explain back to their clients. No, guys, this is a legitimate government initiative that is positive and has good intentions behind it. I'll come off the geopolitics in a minute, but it does interest me. So OECD is not an organization that the patent profession crosses very often. I actually had to look up what it stands for. I've heard of it. I thought there was coal. I thought one of the words in it was coal. It's not. It's the C, obviously. Nor is that not Lee's son either, just to be really clear. I'm trying to pay attention here. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. How much say do they have in our tax law? What's going on?
Quite a bit, actually. You would be surprised. Off subject, if you look at what they call double tax treaties, which are treaties between different states worldwide to minimize double taxation, where you get people who are deriving income from two different states, they all follow an OECD model. They're all very, very similar. So a lot more than probably you would give them credit for.
Well, that's worrying, isn't it? I've got a complete side thing. I'm fascinated by the Magna Carta, and there's almost all of it has been removed. Lee, don't make that face. This is highly relevant.
There is no the. You can't be fascinated by the Magna Carta.
I'm trying to
Magna Carta.
Is it? Like Big Carter? It's like kind of a...
There's no there. Okay. There is no there. Sorry, that's just me being a pedant. I know
No.
I know that might be difficult for you as a patent attorney to have another pedant come at you.
What's going on here? No. Okay, Magna Carta, like Big Carter. It's like a kind of a wrestling name, isn't it? But my point is that I've always been fascinated by this, some remaining bits of it. And one of them is that we kind of make our own law and you can't buy it. And it always worries me when I hear about external entities having enough power to actually change our law. That's definitely a different podcast, though. So let's get back to Patent Box. And yeah, can you started talking about some of the development criteria. So if I've got a British client who's innovating, what kind of things do they basically need to make sure they've got in place to make the best use of Patent Box?
Okay, well, firstly, they need to make sure that they qualify. So they need to be a company that is within the charge the UK corporation tax. They have to be deriving profits from intellectual property, what's known as a qualifying IP right. And as I mentioned before, they would have to have been involved either in the creation or the development of that IP. Just to go into a little bit of detail, a qualifying IP right, I've actually got the list in front of me. It's a UK patent granted under the Patents Act 1977, a patent granted under the European Patent Convention, a supplementary protection certificate, not something I've ever dealt with myself, plant breeders' rights under the Plant Varieties Act 1997, or any community plant variety rights granted under Council Regulations EC number 2100/94.
Okay, so it's patents in kind of biotech. SPCs are kind of prolonging the life of drugs. Oh, they're bloody valuable. That's interesting. So I can see why that would be very attractive to people. That was a good little clause written in there. Oh, this is a really boring question. Does it say if the European patent has to be enforced in the UK? Sorry.
When you say enforce in the UK, I mean, there just has to be a European patent and you're deriving profits from whatever your patented asset is or patented process.
Okay, so thank you. That's really helpful. So it's not trademarks and designs and all other stuff like that. It's kind of around tech, which makes sense because it's something like a specific area. Thank you. And then you talked about the kind of the requirement that you're involved in the creation or development. Presumably that's to stop people buying in portfolios of IP and then getting tax breaks because of that.
It's anti-avoidance, yeah.
And how what's the evidential level when you're claiming it to show the involvement in creation and development?
That's a good question. I think it's something that would become apparent. I mean, you're not going to be able just to pay lip service to it. You have to actually, and you can't buy that level of creativity or development in from outside. You have to be involved yourself in it. And I think if you were looking at a company and you were looking to see, well, have they created this IP? Well, it's obvious if they've come up with the idea. That's going to be that's going to be apparent. Whether they're involved in the development of, again, you could look at the amount of spend that's going on, the amount that the company's spending on it, any recruitment to aid in the development. So it really would just be a question of seeing how they've gone about it and presenting an argument to HMRC, saying, look, this is, in our consideration, this is significant involvement. There is no, if you like, monetary or numerical limit that you have to exceed.
And it's something, just to add there, it's something that is actually quite interesting when I read up, and I'm sure we'll get onto it, reasons why another reason why so few people take it up is, we've spoken to a lot of patent attorneys about this, and they talk to their clients and basically bounce them back to their accountants. And a lot of accountants shy away from this because it is a very technical and difficult area to deal with. And like David said, it's all about presenting a case to HMRC. Now, if you're not familiar with that process and how to do it and how to deal with those guys in the appropriate way, we see a lot of this with R&D stuff, which again is probably another podcast. That's really where we look at the secret sauce that we add, if you like. It's because we do know the process, we do understand it, we've got in-depth knowledge and experience of it. And that makes the difference, really, about when you come to present your case to HMRC. It's not black and white. It is shades of grey or whatever.
Yeah, can I come in? Can I just ask a quickie question? Again, from my seat largely of ignorance. So listening to what you said there, I'm thinking lots and lots of companies operate kind of very locally, don't they? And they probably get their accountancy advice, tax advice, whatever it might be, very locally. Is there a case that not enough professionals on the ground are either knowledgeable enough or confident enough on the accountancy side to even push companies towards this? And is there a role for the patent professional in this to know enough about it to be saying to companies, you ought to be thinking about this? Yes.
And in my role as a biz dev person for a specialist accountancy firm, I see that a lot. Companies seem to grow up with their accountants. They may start small and they've got someone local, or they would recommend to a friend, and then they get to a certain size and they need specialist advice. And I don't think they realise that they do. I mean, we're not looking at stealing people, other accountancies' customers, things like that. We're looking at providing that specialist service to them. A lot of our customers are solicitors, other accountancy firms, that kind of thing. And yes, you're absolutely right. The specialist knowledge isn't there. And I think a more general accountancy practice would steer their clients away, maybe because one, they don't want to lose them, and two, they don't have the knowledge.
Yeah, and I think it's also fair to say that perhaps a lot of, if you like to say, smaller local accountants probably don't understand the scope of the potential benefit. So if you look at what qualifies as income from IP rights, so it's income from a patented asset or the sale of a patented product, but that could include a product that just has one patented component. So if you built aeroplanes and you patented a dial in the cockpit that was subject to a qualifying patent, then the whole of the sale proceeds of that aircraft would fall within the patent box. The scope is absolutely huge, or potentially huge, and a lot bigger than many people think. And I think a lot of accountants are put off because they see it, the rules as being quite complex. I would say fiddly, not necessarily particularly complex, although there are elements of it that get to the end of fiddly and then trip over into complex.
That's fiddly in the sense of being a little bit kind of nuts and boltsy to do, and not fiddling in the sense of manipulating the numbers.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely not. No, fiddly as in nuts and bolts, accountancy.
Tricky.
Yeah.
He loves it when it gets tricky and complicated. That's where he...
From everything I'd heard, you don't need much IP to make a benefit as long as that IP is invested in patents and technology. So it can be, you could be a very large company with a very small patent portfolio down to one patent, and this could reach across your business.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so like David's example of aeroplanes, if you're Boeing and you make an aeroplane that you sell for £100 million and you patent the wheel nut that costs £10.50, you get patent box relief on the whole aeroplane sale, not just the wheel nut part. So it is big.
I'm sure Boeing have got more patents than their wheel nut, but
I'm sure
so it's a great example.
He was an extreme example. Sorry.
That's my ignorant questions finished, guys. So
thank you. That point about the dial versus the aeroplane was what I was actually getting at a little bit with patent attorneys and broad patent claims. But you could end up getting relief on vastly more than you basically invented. Just want to kind of, but a couple of things. Let's drill into that first of all. Actually, that's really interesting. Let's move away from aeroplane companies. Let's move to people who make things a slightly more manageable size. I don't know, air conditioning units or something like that. Really simple question. If you invent a new bit of an air conditioner, I've literally made that. I don't know where that came from. You invent a bit of an air conditioner. You're selling them in the UK. You've patented it. You get profits from the sales in the UK. On the whole air conditioner, you can get some relief on your corporation tax. That's really straightforward if you've got the UK or European patent. If you are exporting them overseas,
yes.
And what happens then if the money's I can imagine if the money comes back to you, I'm not very good at money basically, but if the money comes back to the UK, I kind of get it. What if the money's going to your overseas, you're selling it in China, but the money comes back to you eventually? How does it work when you go international?
That would depend exactly how you're structured, really. But in order for patent box to apply, remember the company's got to be within the charged corporation tax. And so you wouldn't be able to claim a patent box deduction on income that is not coming back into the UK and potentially subject to UK corporation tax.
That's very clear. Thank you for that. And I can see why, again, there's an incentive there to, that incentivizes people to keep stuff here. And basically, I'm sure there's lots of other tax being paid on the money that comes in. So the government does all right somewhere else. So I'm sort of thinking about advising clients, and we've dealt with the reputational side. And I think that's a compelling point, is that it's actively encouraged by government because it helps the economy. That's a good story in terms of the reputational. Well, they're going to see two principal barriers to doing this. One is, even if you hand over the fiddly bits to experts like yourselves, there's a cost element. And I'm not going to ask you how much you charge, by the way, but that's easily managed. You just say, okay, this is how much the fees are. It is complex, but look how much you save. You balance, you pay one off against the other, and you realize it makes sense. That one makes sense. The other one, and we touched on this a bit earlier, but I think it is an important one for many innovative companies in the UK, very busy. They're saying, okay, we can the fees make sense. We'll offset that against the savings. Awesome, no problem. But what about the evidential burden? How much paperwork am I going to have to give to the accountancy company for them to be able to satisfy HMRC? How much change am I going to have to make to our internal processes? Is the upheaval and the admin element, the time element, if you like, is that going to be unattractive potentially?
No, I don't see any reason why there should be any particular need to change, recording processes or whatever. The company has to make an election to elect into the patent box. And again, for our clients, we do that. The rest of it is all a calculation process. So as long as we're able to extract the information from the company's own records in the normal way, we can do the calculation. Basically, it becomes obvious what your IP income is. You separate your company's income into what's known as the standard stream, which is non-IP income, and then the IP income stream. And then you split that down into each item of intellectual property if you've got more than one. And then the calculation figure, what that does, or the various calculation steps you have to go through, it just fine-tunes that figure to remove from it anything which doesn't relate to the actual IP itself. Such as what's known as the marketing return. You've got an example of the marketing return.
Yeah, the marketing return, and again, this is what make the calculation is tricky. But say if you're Apple and you sell iPhones, and someone comes and buys your iPhone, how much of the reason that they buy that iPhone is because of that patented invention that is that piece of technology, or how much of it is just because it's an Apple thing, and there's that whole branding that has to be, there's a calculation around that. Now, that kind of blew my mind a little bit. How do you figure out, how do you work out how much of, when I decide I want to buy a new iPhone, how much of that is because it's an Apple iPhone or because it's got a new flashy patented camera or patented function or whatever like that, So yeah, that all has to be kind of taken into account. And again, comes down to, like we mentioned earlier, about how you present your case. And think about it. I mean, Apple's obviously on a massive scale. I mean, if you can move that branding a couple of points one way or the other, again, the potential figures involved there, could be massive, So
am I hearing there that companies, if they really want to maximize the potential out of the patent box, need to brand in a way that makes people understand that their choice is about the technology and not about the color, the shape, the feel? Is that what I heard there?
I think that's probably a fair summation of it. Yeah,
it's all about the technical innovation and not the sort of lifestyle choice, I suppose you could say.
Possibly, I'm thinking now back to a very well-known case that Gwilym will know, possibly not helped by certain judges, then having previously said that the reason people buy one technology project over another is because they're cool. We've had him on the podcast and he won't mind me saying that.
But that's actually
exactly that. Yes, exactly that. Yeah,
there's interesting parallels for what it's worth, actually, but not firstly in the world of patenting, kind of as Lee says, one of the questions is it successful because of the technology, or was basically branding and marketing part of it? Used to be a really important part of commercial success argument, which is a bit dead now anyway. But the other thing is in our damages calculations as well, and royalty calculations. It's all about what. So there may well be some parallels in other areas. But just to close off my thing there, so there does sound like there's a bit of work required from the innovation company. They can provide you the numbers, and they can give you, maybe you can interview them and find out about the the impact and contribution of the branding side of it. But going back to the creation and development point, they may have to provide you with some paperwork or be able to point to their process to say, okay.
Yeah, it's good. We would need to create a narrative for them to explain why we felt that, or why they met that development condition. Just interesting you mentioned damages there. I said that qualifying intellectual property income is the sale of, income from the sale of an asset or a process. It also includes damages for infringement. That goes within the patent box as well. So an interesting point, but I don't want to get too pedantic about it, is if you've got a client who is in the process of claiming damages for infringement of a patent, and the patent then expires, in theory, because they don't have a qualifying IP right anymore, they couldn't be in the patent box, but actually they can. So they need to keep elected into the patent box. And then when those damages are paid, even if the patent has already expired, they could claim patent box relief.
Oh, this is great fun.
I've now got another question off the back of that. So now thinking about the litigation thing, this might be an entirely bonkers question, but let me play it out because I'm the intelligent bystander in the room. What about
you're a bystander?
Cheers, mate. What about if someone a company has gained significant benefit, the patent box, and then in a subsequent litigation, their patent is found to be invalid?
Ooh, well, very good question. Well, in going back to first principles, then they should never have qualified, because they didn't hold a UK patent, or a valid UK patent, presumably. It would be back down to Corporation Tax 2010. Did they, at the time they made the claim, was it a valid claim? And they would need to make sure they met all the conditions at the time. And if it subsequently turns out that actually one of the conditions wasn't met, the patent wasn't valid or something like that, then I would have thought they would have their relief clawed back.
I would fight that. I'd come in and help you on that one, because I think there's some. You can bring me in. I'm not, just hire me when this comes up, because there's some case law out there actually about what happens if party one gets sued successfully for infringement on a patent, and then subsequently party two attacks the patent and knocks it out. And I think I can't remember the Latin. I wish I'd studied law properly. There's a really good Latin word for don't mess around with res judicata. Maybe it runs a Magna Carta. Anyway, something like that. Just
Sounds
don't mess
good.
around. Don't mess around with settled cases or something. So that's a good question. But it also makes it quite attractive to start suing towards the end of life of a patent, which is not always a great idea because you've got the statute of limitations on that to get your damages back. Interesting.
Yeah,
Good one,
sorry
Lee.
about that one. It just
That's a good
struck
one.
me then.
I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Well,
Tricky.
another thing to bear in mind, obviously, is when you apply for a patent, there's going to be a period when the patent is pending. You don't, in theory, you wouldn't qualify for patent box treatment. And in fact, you wouldn't until such time the patent is granted. But it makes sense to elect into the patent box as soon as you apply for the patent, because you can use the calculation method to calculate a deduction for patent box, which you can then apply to the year in which the patent is finally granted. So just because you haven't got it yet, you can still apply into the patent box. You don't get the benefit immediately, but you can you can get it when the patent is applied for if it's within 6 years.
Yeah, so you can claim, if you've been earning revenue from a patent pending for 6 years, the patent's then granted.
What you can claim is in the first year that the patent is granted, you can then claim a deduction which relates back to the previous 6 years. So in that first year, you get a big clobber of relief.
So I don't know whether this is final question for me. It feels like, I mean, we've done a fair old grounding, but fairly early doors, you guys said that, I don't know whether you used the word popular, or we certainly said that it wasn't well enough known and not enough companies, firms are using it. Who is using it? You don't have to, we talked a bit about Starbucks, you don't have to give me kind of particular examples. Are there particular tech areas where it's big in, or particular industries?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from the point of view of our clients who we do patent box claims for, it's certainly tech as in IT tech. That's an area where it's very popular. I think it depends on the quality of advice a company is getting from their accountant, and I suppose whether their patent attorney, as to whether people will apply to use it. It's not as popular, let's say, as the claim for R&D tax credits, which every man and his dog is doing. It's because it has that additional complexity. It's not, the take up is not as high as it should be.
It might be everything in a name, isn't it? I mean, patent box doesn't make you think that this is a way that you can really bring sort of like a financial benefit to your organisation.
What would you call it, Lee?
Well, I quite like the current government's all about innovation, isn't it? And you can't help but think if this was something about kind of innovation plus or something like that, it just sounds a bit better than patent box.
Innovate to reduce your corporation tax.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
It is, but it gets to the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, patent box. It is. I don't know where the expression came from, but you're right. What is it? It doesn't explain what it is on the outside of the packet.
I reckon it sounds too much like Pandora's box, doesn't it? You don't want to do other than that.
And nobody wants to open that. It's interesting that you kind of brought a joke in there, because as we've been recording, I've had an email from quite a famous comedian. This question for you, Gwilym. Well-known comedian, does a lot of panel shows, and particularly on Channel 4. He says, I don't know why he's asked me this. Can you patent a joke? He's asked me. I don't know why he's asked that.
No. I wouldn't get paid a lot for that advice.
I'll explain the joke to him later.
You should get I gather comics are really, really proprietorial about their jokes as well. Never nick someone else's joke.
I think it was more. I was suggesting that there might be particular comedians who would be interested in the tax angle.
Oh, nice.
It was my attempt at a joke. Sorry.
It's not. We can patent that.
It was far too clever, wasn't it?
No,
Yeah.
it's so clever. It was so clever. It's patentable. We're good. Back in the game,
guys. We've spent a lot of time asking you questions, and you've been brilliant. Oh, no, he's got another one. Go on then.
Another one. This is different though. So we at the beginning, you mentioned it before we started recording that you guys have got a podcast. We put a lot of thought into the name of our podcast, 2 IPs in a Pod. Very happy with that.
Name. Brilliant name.
What's your awesomely clever, funny name?
Yeah, so our awesomely funny, clever name.
We are a firm of chartered accountants, so it's not going to be witty.
Is the Friend Partnership Podcast.
Get in.
Yeah, do you know
That's
what I mean?
patentable.
does exactly what it says on the tin. Yeah.
Yeah, no one have any clue what we do, so you win there for sure.
You're going to get a lot of people looking for a dating agency.
Works for me. Works for me.
Is there anything we've not asked you? Is there stuff that you still need to get across, or have we given it a fair old grounding?
I think we've probably been through.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't particularly think there's any point going through any detail about how you do the various stages of the calculation.
Oh God, no.
You'd lose the will to live. You really would, and that's our complexity to deal with, not anybody else's. So I think we've probably covered just about everything.
I think the main consideration I've got really is plan now and opt into the scheme as soon as possible. Don't wait till you're a couple of 3 years into the patent process. Get the appropriate advice now. And speak to more than just your accountant. Speak to a specialist tax advisor. That doesn't cost a lot. So do that. Make sure you've got all the relative knowledge for your application, and then make an informed decision based on that.
Well, thanks for coming on, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure having you. You've certainly made it far more interesting than I was anticipating. I've actually really enjoyed this, and I was dreading it. No.
Thank you very much.
Rude. Terrible.
Yeah, a sigh of relief when I heard that neither David or Sean were actually accountants.
No, thank you. Thanks for having us.
Brings us to an end. Thank you so much for that. Gwilym, normally we round up with some kind of round robin-y type of question, but I don't have one.
What's your favourite Christmas present, Lee? It's been that long, I didn't even know what that was.
Blimey, my favourite Christmas. Oh, I got this amazing device for templating sort of difficult cuts when you're doing tiling and woodwork and stuff like that, which I've wanted for ages. And so it's kind of like a profiling tool.
I got a light up mask. There you go. So, yeah. And if you say stuff, it's got voice recognition as well. This is obviously podcasting listeners will have to believe me, but it's pretty astonishing. The graphics.
It is.
I agree. It's very astonishing.
What's the green tick?
I don't know. That's what you're saying. It's really clever. There you go. Not bad.
How about you two guys? Any fascinating presents you want to share with us before we go?
I got a jar with 2 black truffles in it and a truffle shaver. Quite enjoyed that.
I've never tried to shave my truffles.
Oh, you should, believe me. Black truffles. So you just shave them over a mushroom risotto, shall we say, or something like that.
It's just very sophisticated.
Oh yeah.
I got a new watch. That's boring, isn't it? But it's very good. I like it a lot.
Is that the annoying one that keeps beeping?
Yes, the annoying one that keeps beeping, telling me to stand up and walk around and all this. I think my other half's trying to tell me something.
Has it got your resting heart rate on it?
It does indeed. I've had to take it off actually because it kept beeping earlier. So it's on the other side of the room at the moment.
Oh, nice resting heart rate then. That'll look good.
Yeah, I'm dead according to that there.
Well, thanks guys. Really, really enjoyed it. And
thank you.
Gwilym, see you on the next one, mate, whenever that is.
Very soon, I think. See you soon.